Hey everyone, it's Taehyung. I want to start by asking you something. Where are you listening from? Drop your country in the comments below. This is it. I can't do this anymore. I'm saying goodbye not to music, not to the stage, not to the dream that carried a boy from a small room with nothing but a broken keyboard and a heart full of hope. That dream, it's still alive. What I'm saying goodbye to is something quieter, something heavier, something that has been sitting inside me for years without me ever admitting it out loud. I'm saying goodbye to the version of myself that believed survival meant never stopping, never softening, never letting silence speak louder than the sound of my own drive. I'm sitting here saying this, not under bright lights, not with a crowd chanting my name, but alone with the soft hum of a room that finally feels still. Stillness that used to terrify me. Stillness that I drowned with beats, deadlines, schedules, expectations stacked so high I couldn't tell where I ended and the work began. For years, motion was my proof of existence. If I was moving, producing, writing, performing, then I was alive. But if I stopped for even a moment, fear crept in, the fear that everything I had built would crumble if I loosened my grip. My chest tightens as I say this, the way it does just before stepping on stage, lights about to rise, one last breath, wondering if the person standing there is enough. I lived my life in that breath, stretching it, holding it, convincing myself that one more song, one more album, one more tour would make it all make sense. I have spent years preaching passion, discipline, giving everything you have to what you love. I meant every word. I still do. But tonight isn't about ambition, success, or even music. Tonight is about admitting something I didn't know how to say before. I can't keep living as if my value depends on exhaustion. I can't keep measuring my worth by how much pain I can turn into productivity. There's a version of me that learned very early how to endure. He learned to turn doubt into fuel, criticism into pressure, pressure into sound. He learned to survive spaces that felt too big, expectations that cut too sharp, days that stretched endlessly. That version of me did what he had to do. He kept going when stopping wasn't an option. He built something real with six other souls who carried their own fears, scars, and unspoken goodbyes. Together, we learned to lean on each other without always knowing how to rest. Somewhere along the way, endurance became my identity. I began believing that if I wasn't struggling, I wasn't trying hard enough. If it didn't hurt, it didn't count. I wore long nights like a badge. I joked about sleep deprivation. I hid exhaustion behind sarcasm, behind beats that hit harder than my heart ever admitted it was hurting. From the outside, it looked like control. From the inside, it felt like clenching my fist so tightly that I forgot how to open my hands. Imagine waking up every day with your mind already racing, melodies colliding with worries, expectations, layered over simple thoughts like static you can't turn off. Imagine sitting in rooms where every word you say is dissected, quoted, replayed, judged, loved, hated all at once. Imagine carrying not just your own dreams, but the weight of six others intertwined with yours, knowing that when one of you stumbles, all of you feel it. That was my normal. That was our normal. And for a long time, I believed that was the price of meaning. But lately, something shifted. Not with drama or collapse, no breaking headlines. It came quietly, in between schedules, in moments I used to ignore. I caught myself staring at nothing, letting a beat loop in my head without turning it into a song. I noticed how tired my body felt even when my mind was still racing. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I listened to music without thinking about how it could be improved, fixed, released. I thought about the people who walk beside me, the ones who know my silences as well as my words. I thought about how many times we held each other up without saying we were tired, how often we smiled for cameras while privately negotiating our own limits. I wonder if I had really been present or always halfway somewhere else, thinking about the next thing I had to survive. This isn't burnout. I know what burnout feels like. Burnout is loud. This is quieter. This is the slow realization that something essential has been thinning inside me, worn down not by failure but by constant output. Success can hollow you out if you don't check in with yourself along the way. I'm speaking to you now not as a celebrity, not as a name on a chart, but as someone scared and relieved at the same time. Scared of what happens when I stop proving. Relieved that maybe I can finally breathe without earning it. My heart pounds as I say this. Even if my voice sounds calm, this goodbye isn't about disappearing. It's about making space for something I don't fully understand yet. The hardest goodbyes aren't the ones with clear endings. There's no manual for letting go of a version of yourself that once saved you. If I keep holding on the way I have, I'll miss the chance to become who I'm meant to be next. And that hurts more than any criticism ever did. Tonight, I'm choosing to loosen my grip, to trust that the music doesn't vanish when I rest, that the bond we share doesn't break when I step back, that the world doesn't collapse if I stop pushing against it. This is my confession, my turning point, my quiet leap into something unknown. I'm taking it with you because some moments are too heavy to carry alone. Have you ever had to say goodbye to something you loved? Not because you wanted to, but because you knew it was the only way forward? Maybe it was a dream that once kept you alive but started consuming you? Maybe it was a version of yourself that believed strength meant silence and endurance meant never asking for help. If that feels familiar, you understand the ache sitting in my chest right now. For me, this goodbye isn't one thing, it's a whole way of being. The reflex to stay awake when my body begged for rest. The instinct to turn every feeling into a product. The belief that if I slow down, I'm letting everyone down. Saying goodbye to that part of me feels like losing armor I wore so long I forgot it was heavy. I've stood at crossroads before leaving home, choosing music over safety, stepping on stages that only existed in imagination, but this one is different. I'm not running towards something new or away from something old. I'm standing still, asking the question I avoided for years. Is this still serving music or serving my fear of stopping? I want you to know something before this moment ends. This goodbye doesn't erase the past nights, sacrifices, shared struggles, the six voices moving as one. It all mattered. It still does. But even the strongest songs need silence between the notes. Even the hardest beats need space to breathe. This is not the end. It's the pause I never allowed myself to take. And as I stand here, heart racing, hands unclenched, I know this goodbye isn't surrender. It's the beginning of learning how to live inside what I've built, not just carry it. I didn't realize how long I had been holding on, gripping so tightly to a version of myself that only knew endurance. I built an identity around surviving, around proving that I could keep going when everyone else might have fallen apart. For years, that survival instinct saved me. It carried me through uncertainty, criticism, and exhaustion. But it also kept me from feeling what I needed to feel. It kept me from resting. It kept me from being present. The moment I allowed myself to slow down, to breathe, to just exist without action or purpose, fear whispered, what if I'm not enough without constant output? What if the world forgets me if I stop pushing? What if I disappear into irrelevance? Those thoughts haunted me quietly, always in the background, like a soft hum beneath the louder noise of deadlines, tours, songs, and expectations. I've learned something profound lately. Fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, creeping in under the surface, convincing you that being needed, being productive, being visible at all times is the only way to matter. And for years, I believed it. I mistook it for discipline. I mistook it for dedication. I mistook it for love for what I do. But the truth is, it was just fear. I've spent my life transforming emotion into art. Anger, insecurity, doubt, exhaustion, they all became melodies, beats, lyrics. People called it authenticity, honesty, depth. They praised the skill, the dedication, the ability to turn vulnerability into something tangible. But they didn't see what it cost me. They didn't see how much of myself I left behind in the process. How often I ignored exhaustion because it wasn't dramatic enough to justify stopping. How often I neglected tenderness, patience, and presence because they didn't produce output. And it's not just about work, it's about life too. I've carried people, emotions, responsibilities, expectations like weights I never set down. I thought that was strength. I thought that was being committed, but it was hiding from silence, from vulnerability, from truth. And when I finally start to let go, I realize how much of my life has been shaped by that pattern. I remember nights sitting alone in the studio, the room empty except for the hum of lights, half written lyrics scattered around me. I told myself I was being responsible. I told myself I was being dedicated. But the truth was, I didn't know who I was without the music asking things of me. I didn't know who I was without constantly proving myself. And that's exhausting, that's lonely, that's heavy. The goodbye I'm speaking of isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, it isn't a single declaration. It's slow, it's patient, it's persistent. Every time I step back, every time I allow myself a pause, every time I resist the urge to produce, to explain, to perform, I practice it. I practice letting go without fear controlling me. I practice acknowledging that my worth isn't tied to output. And it's messy. Sometimes I regress. Sometimes the old habits of pushing, overworking, disappearing into effort, coming back stronger, louder, sharper, all come back. I notice it creeping into my thoughts, my body, my daily life. And each time I remind myself, being still doesn't mean failure. Resting doesn't mean weakness. Choosing depth over reach doesn't mean giving up. Choosing presence doesn't mean losing ambition. There's a difference between dedication and self abandonment, and I'm learning to recognize it. Slowly, painfully, deliberately, I am learning to live in a rhythm that doesn't revolve around proving, achieving, performing. I am learning that strength can be quiet, that endurance isn't the same as fulfillment, that silence isn't emptiness, that rest isn't absence. It's strange how much of my life has been shaped by anticipation, always preparing for the next thing, always bracing for impact, living in a constant state of almost finished, almost enough, almost there, and letting go of that anticipation, that constant planning, that hyper vigilance is disorienting. I feel exposed, I feel uncertain, I feel empty in ways I haven't felt in years. But I also feel free, I also feel space, I also feel alive in a new way. I've started noticing subtle changes in my body. The way my shoulders are no longer permanently tense, the way my jaw can unclench, the way my heart can slow down without guilt, the way quiet moments can feel like presence rather than absence. And with these changes, my mind has started noticing subtle emotions I had neglected for years: tenderness, vulnerability, joy without performance, gratitude that doesn't need justification. These feelings aren't dramatic, they aren't loud, but they're real, they're healing, they're grounding. And as I let myself feel them, I realize how much of my life I spent chasing validation from the wrong places. Approval, achievement, output, visibility, recognition. I mistook them for meaning. I mistook them for proof of existence. But the truth is, meaning can live quietly, internally, without noise or attention. I've also noticed how letting go has affected relationships. When I stopped treating myself like a resource to be consumed, I stopped treating others that way. I listen differently. I allow space. I show up without urgency. I don't rush to fill silence. And the connections I thought depended on my performance or my proof of worth, those connections didn't break. They grew stronger. Presence became the measure of love, care, and commitment, not productivity. There are days when old habits come back, when I feel the urge to disappear into work, to overperform, to push harder than my body or mind can sustain. And when that happens, I remind myself it's okay to be human, it's okay to step back, it's okay to exist without constantly proving anything. I'm learning to trust that the world doesn't collapse when I stop carrying it alone. I'm learning to trust that I don't disappear when I stop pushing myself into exhaustion. Each day of this goodbye is practice. Every small choice, closing the notebook without finishing, pausing without producing, laughing without creating content, teaches me something new. It teaches me patience. It teaches me presence. It teaches me how to feel without immediately transforming that feeling into something tangible. And in that practice, I find freedom. I find life. I find honesty. It's a slow process. It's uncomfortable. It's unfamiliar. But for the first time in years, it feels real. I don't have to chase myself to know I exist. I don't have to push to know I matter. I don't have to perform to feel alive. And the more I embrace that, the lighter I feel, not empty, not hollow, but open, present, grounded, alive in a way I haven't allowed myself before. This goodbye is still ongoing. It's not a single moment. It's not something that ends. It's an unfolding, a living, a gradual loosening of grip over a version of myself that I once thought was necessary to survive. And as I step further into it, I realize letting go doesn't erase the past. It honors it, it builds upon it. It transforms endurance into understanding, exhaustion into clarity, survival into presence. And that's why I'm here saying this with you, because some moments are too heavy to carry alone, because some truths need witnesses, because saying goodbye doesn't mean isolation. It means courage. It means trust. It means learning to be whole even if it's unfamiliar, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it scares me. I can't do this anymore. And yet, in saying it, in stepping back, in allowing myself to exist without constant production, I'm discovering a new kind of strength. Not one that comes from pushing, proving, or performing. Not one that comes from surviving at any cost, but one that comes from presence, from listening, from patience, from self respect. As this goodbye deepens, I notice how my perception of time has shifted. Time used to feel like a weapon, a tool for measurement, a relentless force I had to outrun. Each second counted, each moment needed to produce, to achieve, to validate my existence. I mistook motion for life, effort for value, noise for meaning. And in that chaos, I lost touch with the simplicity of being. I lost touch with myself. Now, letting go means inhabiting time differently. It means allowing moments to exist without immediate translation into productivity. I notice the rhythm of my own breath, the subtle shifts in my body, the quiet spaces between thoughts. Those spaces, once terrifying, now feel like possibility. They feel like life waiting to be lived, not conquered, not optimized, not proof of something external. I've come to understand that endurance, while admirable, can become a cage. The cage is invisible. It's woven from habits, expectations, fear, and pride. And you don't see it until you try to step outside it. Until you realize that surviving alone, pushing constantly, producing endlessly is not the only way to matter. That cage feels familiar, comfortable even, safe, but it's heavy. And the first step outside is disorienting. I noticed the subtle ways I had internalized pressure. Even when there was no external demand, my mind and body carried it anyway. My shoulders stiffened, my jaw clenched, my heart raced. Even in silence, I felt urgency. Even in stillness, I felt incomplete. That realization was painful. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet ache that lingered until I learned to meet it with patience rather than resistance. Meeting it with patience meant learning to listen to myself in ways I had never allowed. Listening without judgment, listening without immediately translating discomfort into action. Listening to fatigue without trying to power through it. Listening to joy without trying to convert it into content or art. Listening to silence without feeling compelled to feel it. It's a subtle, relentless practice. Each day I remind myself that being still doesn't equate to failing, that resting doesn't equate to weakness, that presence doesn't require output, that love, care, and commitment don't demand self erasure. And slowly, I notice how this shift transforms my interactions. Conversations are richer, laughter feels lighter, connection deepens when it's not transactional. Presence becomes the metric, not performance. There are moments, though, when fear creeps back. Fear of invisibility, fear of irrelevance, fear of not being enough. It whispers, subtle and persistent, questioning every pause, every step back. But I've learned to meet it differently. I acknowledge it, sit with it, and act despite it. I don't silence it, I don't obey it, I observe it, learn from it, and choose a different path. In those moments, I also notice gratitude. Gratitude for the ordinary, the overlooked, the seemingly mundane, shared meals that aren't meetings, conversations that aren't strategic, silence that isn't empty, laughter that isn't performative. Those moments weren't remarkable in the conventional sense, but they're rich with life, they're grounding. They remind me that not everything valuable must be quantifiable or visible. I've also begun noticing how my relationships respond to my own shift. When I stop treating myself as a resource to be exhausted, I stop expecting others to fill me or be filled by me constantly. I show up differently. I listen differently. I allow space. And what I've discovered is that people adapt, they respect, they match the pace, and sometimes they even lead the way. Trust becomes reciprocal, not dependent on proving worth. This goodbye continues to teach me boundaries. Boundaries with time, with energy, with expectations, with work, and with others. Boundaries that honor my limits without guilt. Boundaries that allow me to exist fully without overextending. Boundaries that recognize that I am enough as I am, not as I perform. And within those boundaries, I find freedom, not in abandoning commitment, not in ignoring responsibility, but in approaching both with clarity and self respect. I begin to see creativity differently. Once, ideas demanded urgency. Inspiration had to strike perfectly, immediately, and be captured flawlessly. Fear whispered that if I waited, the opportunity would vanish. Now, I learned to allow ideas to unfold, to trust that silence and stillness do not kill creativity, they cultivate it. The pace slows, yes, but depth grows. Ideas become less frantic, less desperate to prove themselves. They arrive when they are ready, and I receive them fully, without forcing, without pressure, without fear. And yet, the struggle remains. Old patterns, old instincts, old voices of doubt, they return. They question, they push, they insist that I must perform, must endure, must validate constantly. Each time they return, I remind myself, you've survived before, yes, but survival alone isn't life. Presence, authenticity, patience, and trust are life. I don't have to prove myself to exist. I don't have to exhaust myself to matter. I don't have to be constantly seen to be real. Each day is a practice in this goodbye. Choosing differently, even in small ways, builds something profound. Closing the notebook without completing every line, letting a song rest without finishing. laughing without documenting, sitting with others without planning, producing, or performing. Each act is a small step toward freedom. Each moment of presence, however brief, is a declaration that life is more than output, more than proof, more than noise. I've also learned to confront grief differently. Grief for the version of me that believed constant motion equaled value. Grief for the nights lost to overwork. Grief for tenderness postponed. Grief for joy deferred. Grief for presence. Sacrifice for performance. And instead of converting that grief into productivity, I sit with it, I allow it, I acknowledge it, I feel it fully, and in that feeling, I begin to heal. This goodbye also reshapes my sense of self. I realize I had been defined by tension, by motion, by achievement, but beneath that, there is another version of me still human, still fragile, still alive, capable of joy, connection, and rest. I start to meet that version of myself without shame, without fear, without judgment, and as I do, I discover a depth of self respect and self compassion I had never allowed before. I begin to notice the subtle joys that were always there but always ignored. The quiet rhythm of the city outside the window, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the way music can simply be heard without performance. The laughter of friends without documentation. The shared silence that isn't filled with expectation. Those things, simple and fleeting, become profound. They become evidence that life exists beyond proof, beyond output, beyond endurance. Each day, the goodbye unfolds further. It's not a single moment or declaration. It's a living, breathing practice. Every choice to rest, to pause, to be present without producing reshapes the landscape of my internal world. The version of me that feared stillness, that clung to effort as proof, slowly softens, and in that softening, there is liberation, there is life. I also start to recognize the difference between intensity and depth, that sharpness, urgency, pressure, and performance are not the only ways to measure dedication. That intensity can burn out, but depth can endure. That moving slower doesn't mean stopping. That presence doesn't mean laziness. That listening doesn't mean weakness. That rest doesn't mean giving up. And slowly, I begin to internalize these truths. This goodbye is teaching me patience. Patience with myself, patience with others, patience with the world, patience with the passage of time. It teaches me that growth isn't always expansion, that strength isn't always pushing forward, that life doesn't have to be a performance to be meaningful, that presence, honesty, and integrity can carry their own weight. I notice subtle shifts in my relationships. Conversations are more real. Laughter is lighter. Connection is deeper. The people who matter aren't dependent on my performance. They meet me where I am. They walk beside me, not behind me. And in those interactions, I find affirmation that life can exist without constant proof, without constant output, without relentless endurance. And in all of this, I realize the power of choice. Every act of pausing, every decision to step back, every refusal to overextend is an act of agency. I choose presence over performance. I choose depth over reach. I choose honesty over intensity. I choose myself without abandoning care for others. And each time I make that choice, I feel lighter, freer, more aligned with life itself. This goodbye is ongoing. It's a journey, not a destination. It doesn't end with a statement, a decision, or a single act. It continues every day, in every moment, in every breath. And as it continues, I feel a quiet steadiness growing inside me, a steadiness that doesn't require applause, recognition, or output to exist. I can feel it settling, gently, persistently, almost imperceptibly. The tension that once defined me softens. The fear that whispered constantly grows quieter. The urge to prove myself diminishes. And in that quiet, in that softness, I begin to recognize a new form of strength. A strength that doesn't scream, a strength that endures quietly, a strength that simply exists. This goodbye has not been a single moment. It has been years in the making, but I am finally meeting it head on. I am stepping into it fully, with vulnerability, with courage, with patience, and with trust. And in doing so, I am discovering that life, presence, and meaning do not require relentless motion. They require authenticity, they require honesty, they require letting go. As the days pass, I start to notice subtler shades of my own humanity. The person who once measured worth in achievements now measures it in moments of connection, of stillness, of presence. Each morning I wake, I feel a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Apprehension for the old habits that still tug at me, and curiosity for what it means to exist without proving, without pushing, without performing. It's a strange balance, both fragile and exhilarating. I find myself reflecting on the patterns I've carried through my life, the ways I've chased recognition, validation, and the fleeting glow of approval. How every effort, every smile, every word spoken was often filtered through an invisible lens of judgment, first mine, then the world's. And as I reflect, I realize how exhausting it all was. Not physically, not just mentally, but at the level of the soul. It drained me quietly, leaving traces that were only visible when I stopped long enough to see them. Stopping, though, is no simple act. The body and mind resist, accustomed as they are to constant engagement. Even in moments of rest, guilt whispers, even in silence, fear nudges me to act, to create, to fill the emptiness with meaning. But I have begun to see that this resistance is not my enemy, it is a teacher. It reminds me that transformation is uncomfortable, that growth often feels like loss, and that letting go is rarely painless. In these moments of reflection, I confront loneliness in its rawest form. Not the kind of loneliness that can be remedied by social interaction or distraction, but the kind that emerges when you are forced to face yourself without armor, without performance, without validation. It's uncomfortable, it's heavy, but it is also revealing. In the silence, I see the edges of who I am, the insecurities, the fears, the desires, and the unacknowledged truths. I meet them not as enemies, but as companions on this path. One of the hardest truths I face is that I have spent too much of my life avoiding vulnerability. I equated strength with endurance, resilience with invisibility of emotion, and courage with suppressing discomfort. And in doing so, I built walls that were both protective and isolating. Now, I learn to dismantle them slowly, brick by brick, acknowledging the fragility beneath and allowing it to breathe. This process reshapes how I experience relationships. I notice that when I allow myself to be vulnerable, I invite authenticity in others. Conversations deepen, connections strengthen. Laughter becomes more genuine. Silence becomes a space for understanding rather than a vacuum to be filled. I realize that vulnerability is not weakness, it is a form of strength that carries presence, empathy, and resilience. I also begin to understand the weight of expectation, not just from others, but from myself. The internalized voice that insists on perfection, constant achievement, and visibility is relentless. It critiques, it warns, it threatens, but I have learned to respond differently. I do not suppress it, I do not obey it blindly. I acknowledge it, feel it, and choose my actions independently of its tyranny. In this way, I reclaim autonomy over my own life, one choice at a time. In parallel, I explore creativity in its purest form. I realize that inspiration is not a commodity to be harvested under pressure, but a gift to be received when the mind is uncluttered, the heart open, and the spirit patient. I allow melodies to linger unrecorded, ideas to float without obligation, and thoughts to unfold without urgency. In this patient approach, I discover depth and nuance that were previously obscured by haste. Amid this transformation, I confront fear more directly. Fear of irrelevance, fear of invisibility, fear of losing connection. These fears are not vanquished instantly. They ebb and flow, testing my commitment to this new path. But each time they arise, I meet them with mindfulness. I observe, I name, I breathe, and I act aligned with presence rather than panic. In doing so, fear loses its power over me incrementally. I start to notice small joys, almost imperceptible at first. The warmth of sunlight through a window, the cadence of a friend's laughter, the weight of a shared silence that doesn't demand performance, the satisfaction of finishing a task without urgency. These moments, fleeting and ordinary, accumulate into a profound sense of grounding. They remind me that life is not a race or a ledger. It is lived in the subtle textures of being. I also confront my relationship with my own body. The vessel I had treated as a tool, a machine, a prop in my performance, I now begin to honor as home. I listen to fatigue without guilt. I nourish without obligation. I move without compulsion. I rest without shame. In this way, my physicality becomes a source of awareness, comfort, and even creativity rather than a canvas for performance. The journey of this goodbye is both intimate and expansive. I explore the landscapes of my internal world with curiosity rather than judgment. I ask questions of myself I had avoided. What do I truly desire? What brings meaning? What is non negotiable in terms of my well being? Each answer reshapes my boundaries, priorities, and intentions. And each choice, however small, feels revolutionary. I find that empathy deepens as I practice self-compassion. The more patient I am with myself, the more patient I can be with others. The more I accept my own limits, the more I respect theirs. The more I listen to my own needs, the more attuned I become to the unspoken needs of those around me. This alignment fosters relationships that are less transactional and more human, less performative and more authentic. Grief, too, surfaces in new ways. I grieve the time spent conforming to external pressures. I grieve the opportunities missed due to fear of inadequacy. I grieve the emotional presence I withheld to maintain a facade of strength. But unlike before, I do not convert grief into frantic action. I feel it fully, acknowledge it, and allow it to transform me into a more conscious, grounded, and compassionate being. In the quiet reflection of these days, I also encounter joy differently. It is not loud, not performative, not dependent on recognition. It is a soft, consistent undercurrent that persists despite circumstance. It is found in mindful breathing, in shared laughter, in observing the subtle beauty of the world, and in allowing moments to exist without agenda. This joy, though subtle, carries immense weight. It is proof that life is not measured solely in achievement. The goodbye continues to reveal the layers of my internal world, patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior that once ruled me are examined with detachment. Impulses to prove, to perform, to endure without pause are met with observation. And slowly, incrementally, the inner landscape shifts. The mind is less frantic, the heart less burdened, the body more present. Every day I practice presence. I allow myself to experience emotions fully. I rest without guilt. I create without urgency. I engage without expectation. Each act, small or large, contributes to the dismantling of old patterns and the cultivation of a new way of being, a way that is grounded, authentic, compassionate, and alive. Through this process, I realized that freedom is not about escaping responsibility, nor about abandoning care. Freedom is about choosing alignment with one's own truth, about acting with integrity, about existing fully without surrendering to external pressures. It is a radical act of self-recognition and self-respect. And as I continue this goodbye, I notice resilience growing in subtle ways. Not the resilience born of endurance or suppression, but the resilience born of awareness, presence, and compassion. The resilience that allows one to meet challenges without fear, to embrace vulnerability without shame, and to live authentically without apology. This ongoing journey is a testament to patience, courage, and humility, to the understanding that life is not defined by constant motion, but by intentional presence. That meaning is not found in performance, but in authenticity. That love and care are not measured by sacrifice, but by honesty and integrity. And in this understanding, I find a quiet, enduring strength that does not demand recognition. As I sit in these quieter moments, I begin to see the contours of my life with new clarity. The frenetic energy that once defined my existence, the endless pursuit of perfection, the constant self surveillance, all of it starts to appear less necessary. I realized that I had been living in a loop of reactive survival, mistaking busyness for purpose and exhaustion for value. And now, for the first time in a long while, I am learning to separate my worth from my output. I notice how the very act of slowing down shifts perception. Tasks that once seemed urgent lose their immediacy. Worries that once crowded my mind disperse like mist. The world remains present, steady, and unyielding, even when I choose to stop. And in this stillness, I find a subtle but profound reassurance that life does not collapse when I rest, that love does not vanish when I pause, that connection does not erode when I allow myself to simply be. This has changed the way I relate to time. Once it was a relentless adversary, every moment had to be seized, every hour optimized, every day justified. Now, time feels expansive, pliable, almost fluid. I can inhabit it without fear, allowing it to move through me rather than me against it. The pressure to perform, to produce, to impress softens in this new rhythm. And with that softening comes a sense of liberation I had never known. I am also learning to embrace imperfection. For years, I pursued flawless execution in everything I did, believing that only perfection could earn acknowledgement or respect. Now, I am beginning to understand that imperfection is not failure, it is life itself. It is the texture of experience, the nuance of being, the authenticity of existence. And in embracing imperfection, I discover a new kind of courage, the courage to show up, to exist, to contribute, even when things are not polished or complete. This process has profound implications for creativity. Without the constant push, I find that inspiration arrives more organically. Ideas emerge from spaces of curiosity rather than obligation. Songs, melodies, and lyrics no longer feel like obligations to be delivered under pressure, but invitations to explore, to feel, to express. Creativity becomes a dialogue with the self rather than a performance for others. And in that dialogue, I find depth, resonance, and meaning that had been obscured by the tyranny of output. I confront my fears with increasing honesty: fear of judgment, fear of irrelevance, fear of vulnerability. These shadows no longer dictate my every move. I acknowledge them, name them, and act despite them. In doing so, I reclaim agency over my choices, over my time, over my presence. I am no longer a servant to fear. I am a participant in my own life. This shift is subtle but transformative. I notice how this internal realignment affects my relationships. Without the compulsion to perform, to impress, or to overextend, I can engage with others more authentically. Conversations are deeper, silences are comfortable, and shared moments carry more meaning. I begin to recognize the people who are present with intention, who choose connection without coercion, who offer support without obligation. And I reciprocate not from duty, but from genuine care. Grief continues to surface, not dramatic, not sudden, but persistent, like a tide that ebbs and flows. I grieve the years spent in relentless motion, the moments of presence I missed, the emotional honesty I postponed. I grieve the self I believed I had to perform, the armor I wore so long it became indistinguishable from me. Yet, unlike before, I do not attempt to convert this grief into productivity. I allow it to exist, to be felt fully, and in doing so, it transforms into understanding, compassion, and clarity. I become increasingly aware of the subtle beauty in ordinary moments. The warmth of sunlight, the laughter of friends, the taste of a simple meal, the quiet hum of a room, these moments, once overlooked, now shine with significance. I realize that life's richness is not measured in grand achievements or public recognition, but in these quiet, lived experiences. The ordinary becomes extraordinary because I am present to witness it. Physical awareness grows alongside mental and emotional awareness. I begin to listen to my body in ways I never did. Fatigue is acknowledged without shame. Hunger is honored without compulsion. Rest is embraced without guilt. The body, long treated as a tool for performance, becomes a partner, a guide, a source of wisdom. I notice how tension eases, how breath deepens, how posture relaxes when I act in alignment with care rather than duty. Each day presents opportunities to practice patience, presence, and restraint. Choosing to pause, to breathe, to step back, even when instinct urges action, becomes a deliberate act of self care. Each choice reinforces the understanding that I am more than the sum of my outputs, that my value does not reside solely in my productivity, that my existence is inherently meaningful. In the midst of this transformation, I confront the subtle habit of comparison. For years, I measured myself against imagined standards, against the perceived achievements of others, against a timeline that was never my own. Now, I question those standards. I ask, whose timeline am I following? Whose definition of success am I upholding? This questioning dismantles inherited pressures, allowing space for authenticity and alignment with my own values. I begin to cultivate gratitude in its simplest forms, gratitude for time unstructured, for laughter shared without agenda, for meals enjoyed without hurry, for silence unfilled. These moments, fleeting yet persistent, cultivate an internal stability I had never known. Gratitude becomes a practice, a lens through which to observe life, a tool for sustaining presence and joy.